The mantra of modern neuroscience is that cells that fire together wire together. And I'm going to come back to that in some detail in a moment. But first of all, I want you to have a look at slices through brains at birth, 1 month, 3 months, 15 months, 24 months. What do you see happening in that brain as it's developing? More and more nerve cells? Yes. But much more importantly, more and more connections between brain cells. I am always in awe of the fact that in the human brain, throughout the fetal development, the brain is creating about 60,000 new brain cells a second. All the way through that 9-month period. And then after that, we create billions and billions more connections. About 100 billion brain cells and probably 100 times that many connections. What other cells that a brain cell connects itself to is determined by whether those two brain cells fire together to do some action or to do something. And I can probably demonstrate it to you in an informal way. How many people here, 3 o'clock in the morning, you wake up and you have a little idea going around in your head and it goes round and round and round. Does this sound familiar to anybody? That's because of this process. Because you start with that thought and those cells are firing together. And cells that fire together wire together. So you create more links between those cells so that as soon as you start that thought, the whole pattern is going to be repeated. And so not only that, but the more you think about it, the more you strengthen it, and so it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Cells that fire together wire together. You were probably lied to at university. No, let me change that. I guarantee you were lied to, but you may actually have been lied to by some of your professors because knowledge has changed. How many people here learned that every cell you were ever going to have was present when you were born, and all you could do after that was lose them? Yeah. Wrong. And I guarantee that the second part of that lecture was every shot of whiskey was going to kill another 100,000 cells, right? Get that one? Yeah. Okay, it's wrong. We now know through some newer techniques that brain cells can be created throughout life. We also know that brain connections, synaptic connections, are created predominantly during the first 6 years of life, which is why active start is from 0 to 6. This is why we've chosen this stage. And after that, you spend the rest of your life pruning out connections that you don't use. This is more accurate data, and this looks at the auditory cortex, the visual cortex, and the frontal cortex. Now, the visual cortex is for vision, the auditory cortex for hearing, and the frontal cortex for reasoning. So if we look at the auditory cortex, this is building up the connections, then pruning them off. If we look at vision, well, does this happen earlier or later than hearing? Earlier. Vision is better than hearing early in life. And then, of course, reasoning. Who's got teenage kids? Okay. Reasoning often not best, but actually this whole thing happens in the frontal cortex much later in the development process, which is why kids don't make good rational decisions early in life. There is a question that has engaged psychologists, motor learning experts, and others, which is, are there critical or sensitive periods? Definition-wise, a critical period. If you miss a skill, you can never learn it. And I mean never. You can't learn it. A sensitive period, an optimal time to learn. But you could learn it afterwards if you missed it. And so what's the kind of consensus, I think? There are perhaps some critical periods in human motor learning, and there are probably sensitive periods. And I have a picture up on there. Does anybody recognize her? It's actually one of the saddest cases. Her name is Jeannie. And I want to actually spend a little bit of time talking about Jeannie. It's a terrible natural experiment. Now, what's a natural experiment? Something happens, you have no control over it, but you try to learn from it. And Jeannie was born in Los Angeles, South Los Angeles, and from birth through to the age of 12 was chained to a toilet in the basement of her home. No social interaction, no physical activity, no contact with any human being. Parents put food down in the basement when she was asleep, and so she had no social contact. She was rescued, and I think that's the right word, because of a mistake. A blind woman was looking for the Los Angeles Society for the Blind or some such group, and she stumbled into social services. And she asked for whatever she was looking for, and they said, "Sorry ma'am, you're in the wrong place. You're social services." And she said, "Well, since I'm here, I think there's a child next door to where I live, or close to where I live. I hear them, but I've never seen them. I think you ought to look into this." So social services arrive, and they find Jeannie locked in the basement, chained to a toilet, 12 years of age. Why is it a terrible natural experiment? Because it gives us an opportunity to ask the question, what happens to those skills if you don't learn them during these critical early years? And so when she was rescued, could she walk? Yes. But the walk was kind of this kind of action, not a walk. Could she throw, catch, or anything else? No. Did she have verbal skills? Almost none. And so there is some evidence from Jeannie that if you do not learn some of these skills by a particular time, you may never learn them. There have actually been several other cases, but she's the best known, and I have to just finish off her story by saying that science comes out of this looking really bad, because there were different groups who wanted to observe her, treat her, experiment on her. They all got into huge legal wrangles. It was just an absolute mess. For anybody who is interested, there was a documentary made about Jeannie. It is, I believe, available from American Public Broadcasting, PBS, as part of their Nova series, and I believe in Europe it's available under the BBC Horizon series. But what it does tell us is that if we don't do things right in the early years, there are long-term consequences of not doing it right. There's another set of data that's kind of interesting that I'll just quickly share with you. Anybody remember from a decade ago all those horrible news items out of Romanian orphanages where they found the kids just abandoned? I mean, they were being fed, but there was no socialization, no social interaction. Well, they've been followed up. And they followed them up in the United Kingdom, where they looked at British babies adopted within 6 months and compared them to Romanian babies adopted within 6 months of birth, and they looked at the incidence of cognitive problems, i.e. some kind of cognitive impairment. And what they found was kids just regularly adopted in the UK, and those who were adopted out of Romania who were under 6 months of age, virtually no difference in cognitive impairment. And this is about what you'd expect, about 3% of them with some kind of cognitive impairment, and that would be a sort of a normal standard number. If the kids had been left in the Romanian orphanage between 6 months and 24 months, they were about 3 times as likely to have a cognitive impairment. And if they were only adopted after they were 2 years of age, it was about 10 times as likely to have cognitive impairment. Again, if we don't get it right in the early stages, then we're going to have problems later on.